But so I was thinking because another thing that I learned from your book, by the way, if you have not read Blind Descent, highly recommend. I was joking around with Brian before we got on this podcast. I read it in like a day and a half, couldn't put it down. It's truly a remarkable story, and a big reason why I wanted to have Brian on the podcast. So, Blind Descent, Amazon, wherever you buy your books, 100% recommend. But one of the things that I was not aware of was how long it takes to get accustomed to the climate
Hmm.
and the altitude, and how often you had to go up to base camp and then come back down, and then go up to camp one, come back down, and then go up to camp two. It was like this whole
Sucks.
process. I bet we'll get into that, but for me, again, not being familiar with Everest, as I'm sure most people who actually haven't, unless you've done it, you might be familiar with how it works. But I was just, I was amazed at how long and how arduous that process seemed.
Yeah. So at 29,035 feet, there's only a third of the air at the top. So in the death zone, anything above 26,000 feet is the death zone. You cannot survive up there for long. If you cut your finger, it won't heal. It's brutal. But before you even have a chance to even get close to that, you have to acclimate. So if you were to pluck your body, where are you at right now?
I'm in Orlando, Florida, so
Okay,
literally
perfect.
sea level.
Z level. If you were to pluck your body, even mine, from where we were at, put you on the summit, you'd pass out and die. There's not enough air. You can't survive. So what you have to do is acclimate. So the acclimatization process is where you climb high and then come back down and sleep low. That forces your body to produce more red blood cells, which carry oxygen. So then after each time, you're just kind of like inchworming up. Your body is fully acclimated to where you can survive up higher without supplemental oxygen. And even with you can go up, with or without. So it took about a month, and you end up climbing the mountain in distance wise, I think like 5 times or something by the time you're done, because you're just up and back, going through some really dangerous areas. Right out of base camp is the Kumbu Icefall, and that is a couple miles of just building sized blocks of ice that are continually shifting and falling. So that's where you see a lot of the aluminum ladders that cross the crevasses that are tied together. Um, I forget, I was counting them as we went through. There's like 30 different ladders, different sections. So you get pretty good at it, but you never want to be complacent. And because you're at altitude, you're just moving in slow motion. You cannot respond fast. Like your mind might be there, but you don't have enough oxygen to actually respond. So you have to be super careful, like in everything. So if there's an avalanche that kicks off, which happens often, or things shift, you got to be able to respond. But I mean, that's why on highly glaciated peaks, you climb through the night when everything is frozen, because once the sun comes up, things become very unstable. A lot of the anchor points, so like there's ropes on Mount Everest and some of these higher mountains, that there's ropes that we attach, or guides or Sherpa attach to anchor points, which a lot of times are metal pickets or screws, which are then heat conductors once the sun comes out, so they can kind of melt out. So you want everything just bulletproof, rock solid to cruise through. Got a headlamp on, and you want to get through these areas as efficiently as possible, because there's areas, because in, what was it, 2015, a major ice block above the Kumbu Icefall calved off and crushed. It's like 15, 16 Sherpa just instantly. It's just horrible. I mean, I went through that, I think 8 times, and every time I'm looking up, it's a matter of time before that thing's going to break off. And if it's your time, it's your time. But you do everything within your power to get through there efficiently. The right timing. When there's no crowds, all that stuff. So there's a lot of thinking involved.
Before we go further, just so that the audience has a good understanding, so there's base camp, there's camp one, there's camp two, and camp three. What are the altitudes at each one of those locations?
And camp four. So there's
Camp four.
base
Okay.
camp is at 17,500 feet, you go through the Khumbu Icefall, and above that, it's like 19,000, I believe is Camp One. And then you go through the Western Khum. Khum is a valley, and it's kind of the safest area on the climb beyond base camp. And that's just under 22,000 feet. There is one section where there's like five ladders tied together. There's this just hellacious crevasse. It's just insane. I think I have a picture of it in the book. You get beyond that, and then you start heading up Lhotse Face. So Lhotse is the fourth highest mountain in the world. You actually climb up Lhotse to get to high camp. And halfway up is Camp 3, which is at 23,000 feet. And that's where you see, like, it's just the tents are anchored off just on a cliff, ice cliff wall. So if you are not roped in or you slip, it's game over. And then from there, you head up. That's usually where you start using supplemental oxygen. So not like scuba where it's 100% compressed air, because if you came off that, you would just die. It just mixes with the outside air like the old World War II fighter pilots. And the highest camp in the world is up in the death zone at 26,000 feet. It's called the South Col. Unless you do it from the north side out of Tibet, then it's the North Col.
So really quickly, I have the picture from your book here pulled up. If you're watching
Nice.
on YouTube, if you can see this, so these are the ladders that you were talking about. I think this was the five
Yeah.
ladders that were put together. So you're just walking across that, and
Yeah.
you're
You
are
can see my
you
hands. I have ropes in my hands. So there are
okay?
like, but as soon as you step on that thing, it drops a couple feet and starts swaying back and forth. Like it's legit, but and you have crampons, remember, those are the spikes. So it's trying to like get the right straddle. If you, I don't know, they make, well, maybe based on your feet size or something, you could pierce through because they're cheap aluminum ladders, and then you get stuck, and then you're like trying to like pull your foot out. So I would kind of high center in the middle and just really get that balance down. I went across one. It was four ladders, and I was completely alone, like up going through the Khumbu Icefall, and the anchor pulled out that I was holding on to, and I was just whoa, 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 and I'm completely alone. So I dropped down and like crawled across. Like there's no shame in survival. Like you got to do what you can, and it's there's nothing beautiful about mountaineering. Like people get their cool pics out there, and that's all neat. But it's anyone who knows, they know.
So I want to go back to the just again getting used to the altitude. You talked a lot in the book about people who just could not get used to the altitude and the conditions. What are some of the? I think you even provided a couple of different sicknesses that can arise and some different conditions. What are some of the effects of the altitude and how it affects the human body?
Yeah, there's altitude and mountain sickness, which everyone's going to get that to a certain extent, where you get headaches. I mean, you're not hungry, so your body is just screaming for oxygen, so you're losing weight like crazy, because it's just burning through, and you're not hungry, so then you're not feeding yourself. You just got to stay hydrated. But yeah, the headaches, nausea, um, you really have to be honest about where you're at, and that can be a problem. Like when I'm guiding people, I'm always checking in, so seeing where they're at and then calling them out when I know better. Um, but the high altitude cerebral edema and pulmonary edema, that's just where you're basically your brain is swelling, your heart is working overtime, and it can very easily, and it does lead to death. So, knowing those symptoms, if your brain is swelling like beyond, you know, what it normally would be, and it's can be pretty obvious, but your heart as well, and if you're hearing, fluid in the lungs, everything else, the only thing you can do is get back down, get to lower altitude, and you will replenish, and you can live to climb another day. But there's certainly people that will push it and then they don't make it.
Yeah. Let's get to the day uh, that you attempt to summit Mount Everest. I believe that was May 15th, 2011. You start in the morning. Lead us through what was going on the night before and then the morning of the summit.
Okay. So it was just myself and Pasong Sherpa, my good friend. It was actually May 14th because we went through the night to summit on May 15th. So we left Camp 3 and we're moving, up the Lhotse face. And I was leading. I stopped about, I don't know, I forget what it was, like 1,500 feet or something above Camp 3. And well, we were getting pushed back. It was like, I think it was like 70-mile-an-hour winds. So it was legit. So it took a while to get there. Just like you wait for those wind gusts to stop, and then you take another step forward, and it's going straight up. So I stopped, and I needed to get some water. So I actually anchored off. So we're not connected to each other. I'm connected to this rope, this fixed line. I anchor off to an anchor point with my carabiner. And in order to get water, I'm now using supplemental oxygen. So I got the tanks in my pack, and I have my mask, my goggles. I take my goggles off, put it around my arm, and go to take my mask off so I can drink some water, and my foot slips out. And I was anchored, but our natural reaction is to grab the rope. Mine was. And the goggles slid off my arm and just they fell, so they were gone. And I'm watching them go down, and next thing I know, some Sherpa down below are waving at me that they had got the goggles. So I'm like, oh, okay, maybe my summit's not over, because you don't typically have like extra gear, extra goggles, anything else, because you have to carry everything. So anyways, I came off oxygen, anchored all that to the picket that was in the wall of ice. I rappelled down. Pasong continued up. I said I'd meet him up there. Got down, and they were about 500 feet below me, and got to the goggles, and they were cracked on the internal lens. So goggles have two lenses. And anyone who does any snow sports knows that the contrast of your breath and the cold outside makes things fog up. Well, mine were fogging and freezing between the layers. So I still needed to use them. After a while, I just ended up ripping the internal lens out, and, not realizing that may have cut their effectiveness in half. And having blue eyes, I'm susceptible anyways, but continued moving up. Made it to high camp, found Pasong in our tent, and we just kind of relaxed for a little bit because it was in the early afternoon, and we'd be leaving around like 8 or 9 p.m., like after the sun set. So we'd climb through the night, hope for a summit as the sun was rising around that time. And we had to triangulate the weather, make sure everything was good. From like Sweden and Seattle, and like everything looked good. There's going to be 50-mile-an-hour gusts like later in the next day, which is totally fine because you should be down by then. And we made the determination we're going to go for the summit. And he's a young guy, has 2 summits already, so he's a good decision maker, and we both agreed on it. And we laid there and tried to get some rest, which is completely impossible. You're all just jacked up and ready to go. So as soon as the sun set, we got our crampons on, got all our gear ready to go, and we headed up and just slowly making our way up. And I don't think we realized at the time that we were the only 2 people going for the summit from either side. No one from the Tibetan side, and we're the only ones on the Nepal side, which is very unusual. So on Mount Everest, there's only a couple days out of the year that you can actually go for the summit, because it's so high up there. It creates its own wind patterns, and you kind of wedge these open weather windows between monsoon season. So to have it to ourselves was just, you see these pictures of like traffic jams and everything else. It's like that was not our experience. So it was quite a blessing to have that. So it's pitch black. Got my headlamp on. We're cruising up, and I start inching away, and eventually get to the halfway point, which is 27,500 feet, halfway between high camp and the summit. And Pasong was nowhere to be seen. He was just falling back. And I sat there for about an hour and just a amazing experience in itself because there was like an electrical storm like miles out way below me, and just like watching that and trying to like capture some video of it, and just eventually Pasong showed up, and I'm like, hey dude, what's going on? He's like, I know feel good. And I'm like, oh man. He's like, I ran out of water, so I gave him one of my extra bottles. Takes a sip and just throws up. I'm like, dude, keep it. And at that moment we had this like serious conversation because it's like, okay, you're clearly not feeling good. Do we need to go down? He's like, no, no, no. I needed some water. It's like we'll head this way and then we'll head up. It's like, I know the route. So I'm like, okay. So in a lot of things in life, you live and die by the decisions you make, but you make those decisions based on the information you have. So you can question after the fact. That's totally fine. But my rule is if I'm not there, I'm not there. I don't have that information. So in that moment, everything was okay. We continued moving up, and about 28,000 feet when he tapped out. This is right before things get a little more technical. So this is where a very serious conversation took place. And he's like, no, 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 you go. It's like the weather's good, you're strong, I'm okay. I'm gonna wait back at the balcony. I'll leave an oxygen bottle here. You get it on the way down. And it was as simple as that. He turned and he just took off. And I turned and started heading up the mountain. I didn't realize he was going to eventually go all the way back down to high camp. But if that's what he needed to do, then it's all survival up there. So I felt good. I felt strong. I started climbing up the South Rock Step, which is it's a rock face. Down at altitude it'd be easy. Up high, everything is hard. Trying to like wedge a point from a crevasse or from a crampon into a like a crack in the rock. And then wedge yourself up with this Jumar device, which has his backwards teeth and kind of holds me in place. It's every move is it's a lot of work. And I got about halfway up there and I look out to my left and captured one of the most amazing video and just moments of my life. Above 28,000 feet, there down to my left, there's a perfect pyramid shadow cast down on the top of the Himalayas. So the sun is rising from the highest point in the world, casting that perfect shadow. And I'm the highest person in the world in that moment, trying to process all of this. It was just, I'm still like, I can watch that video now and it's amazing. You don't get those moments very often or ever. But continued up, made it to the South Summit. And then the South Summit kind of drops back down, which sucks because you're going to have to hike that up on the way out. But went to Hillary Step, which is a 40-foot rock climb, which is usually a point of contention because there's one way up, one way down. So if you have multiple climbers, you got to wait. And that's where you see some of the lines. Well, I just bounced up that, got to the top. The last section is this Cornice Traverse, which is a 2-mile drop on each side of you. So literally like a 1.5 feet across, 2 miles on your right into Tibet, 2 miles on your left into Nepal. So just slowly made my way. And at that point, you can actually see the true summit. And it's just a bunch of prayer flags. And, there was a couple like yellow bags full of extra rope and stuff. And it still takes quite a while. It's like 5 seconds between every step, but just eventually pierced the top of the highest point in the world. And it's a lot to take in just to process in that moment, just that it hurts to cry and just like there's so much emotional just release. I'm still processing to this day.